Hey, what's up, everybody? I am so excited to have Kenzie Dodds here to talk about building better websites with Remix. I've been lately obsessing over Remix, and there's a good reason for it because from the projects I've been working on, it's been making the workflow, the experience so much easier, and it combines really well with Strapi. But the most important thing I want to talk about is Remix. And so we have Kent here. If you don't know who he is, can you give us a brief introduction of what you do and what got you excited with Remix in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kenzie Dodds. I live in Utah with my wife and 4 kids, and um, I uh, I teach people how to build quality software. And I did join Remix back last November, but I recently left Remix. I took care of everything that I needed to take care of, and then went back to full-time educator. Definitely still very involved in Remix. Like I literally have the Remix sign behind me, and I'm wearing a Remix shirt today. Actually, like I'm still very much involved in Remix. But yeah, working full time on epicweb.dev. And for those who don't know, I built epicreact.dev, which is a great place for people to learn React, and testing javascript.com, great place to learn how to test JavaScript. And yeah, that's me. I can tell the whole story of how I got involved in Remix and stuff, but I'll just stop there for now.
No, that's great. And I was going to say, to be fair, you are an amazing educator. So, pursue and do where you have the best reach. So definitely understandable. So what, I'm new to Remix, just to put it out there. So I'm still learning, but why Remix? Like, what problem does it solve compared to some of the other frameworks that are around?
Yeah. Okay. So I joined or started working with Remix pretty much from the beginning. My website before was built with Gatsby. Had a lot of challenges with that because of static site generation limitations. But it was like that was the thing that everybody was doing. And so Ryan and Michael, their business kind of tanks because of COVID, because their business is in-person training, and so they had to kind of pivot. They decided to actually they decided to finish React Router version 6 before they realized that nobody's paying them for that, and why are they working on that when there's like a pandemic and they're going to run out of money. But in the process of doing that, Ryan started working on, I think he was going to build online courses, and so he was building a platform for that. And he had some limitations with Next.js and Gatsby that he just wasn't happy with. And so he's, and actually for many years, like I think like 6 years before this, Michael and Ryan really wanted to work on a full stack framework that eventually would become Remix. Just basically taking React Router to the next level, handling all the server-side rendering and stuff for people. And so Ryan just kind of started working on this. And I think like within a couple days of him starting to work on this, he called me up and said, "Hey, I want to show you this thing." And this thing that he was working on. And probably once a week, maybe twice a week, I would I'd jump on a Zoom call with Ryan. Maybe not quite that frequently, but pretty frequently, I would be on a Zoom call with Ryan, and he'd be showing me something, asking questions and stuff. And so I was very involved in what it was like to, or what Remix was all about from the very beginning. And very excited about what Ryan and Michael were doing, because I didn't see anything that made getting data onto the page so simple, or anything that handled at the time, actually, when Remix was first released in its developer preview, they didn't have a great mutation story. But what I saw was just the power of using the right primitives, which a lot of frameworks try to abstract away and hide the primitives of the web, and Remix abstracts them, but the abstraction exposes those primitives. And so your loader receives a request and returns a response, but there are like utilities for working with cookies and for working with sending JSON responses and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the primitives you're working with are request and response and fetch, and so I could see that they were nailing those primitives. Nested routing was an enormous benefit to the co-location that we're all looking for, without a lot of the drawbacks of co-location from a performance standpoint. And so I could just see that they were really nailing these foundational important aspects of a framework. And so that's why I decided to bet on Remix with my website rewrite, was because I knew that even though they didn't have everything in place yet, there was still developer preview stuff at the time that I started using it. I could see that the foundation was solid. It's much easier to build a house on a solid foundation than to buy a really cool house that doesn't have a good foundation. And so that's how I started getting into Remix.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually sharing your website. You might not be able to see it on your screen. So that's all built with Remix. And I love how you have that feature where people could literally record a phone call to start a conversation with you. And that's pretty cool. And so you decided to go all in on Remix. But the big question still would be for me, it's like, but why? I know you wrote a great article called "The Web: The Next Transition." Can you talk a little bit about that and how and where Remix fits into that?
Yeah, sure. So the web's next transition is basically I've been thinking about this for a really long time, and where Remix fits in with the existing web architectures that people talk about a lot. Because a lot of people say, well, this feels a lot like PHP, and they mean that in a good way. But like it's also a SPA, so it's not quite like PHP. Like it can do SPA things. And so we would talk about it being kind of a remix between an MPA and a SPA. That didn't quite describe it fully. It's neither. It's and both at the same time. And so in thinking about that, I realized that over the last 25 years that the web has been around, we've been able to build web applications because we've always had a link, the anchor tag, and we've had a form. And so the user can navigate around our site and they can make changes to our data. And so we've been able to build these web apps. And started out with multi-page apps. We didn't call them that because that was the only thing that it was possible. We only started giving them that moniker when SPAs came out. But yeah, that's where everything started. And then people started talking about progressive enhancement and making the things better for the user. Enhancing the experience especially when Ajax came out, Gmail and Google Calendar made it so it would server render, but then you add JavaScript to make it so you can have a nicer experience. And then that became a big challenge, mostly because of code duplication between the templates. And so if you server render it, but then you also are able to append items to your list or whatever, you need to have that template for the server render as well as in the client for the client transition or whatever. So there's a lot of duplication, and lots of the time those templates were in completely different languages too. So you had to keep them in sync, just an enormous pain. And so for that reason, we decided to get rid of server rendering and go with SPAs. Now, of course, like there are still people building MPAs and progressively enhanced MPAs. I call those PEMPAs. But the vast majority of developers are working on SPAs. That is not the same as to say the vast majority of apps deployed to the web are SPAs. That is not true. The vast majority of apps of any single category is WordPress still by a large margin. That is not a SPA. But as far as what developers work on, the vast majority is SPAs right now. Single page apps where everything is. In fact, I would probably say that most apps developers work on, everything is rendered on the client. They're not even server rendering. That is changing a little bit, but there's a lot of static site generation happening, which is kind of like a mix. And then there is some server rendering, but server rendering is picking back up because of this next transition we're going into, which is progressively enhanced single page apps. So we went MPA, PEMPA, SPA, and PESPA. And that is what Remix is kind of ushering in, and other frameworks are following suit. We've always been able to build an app that server renders and then hydrates in the client. Like that's been around since like React was released. It's been able to render on the server. But the unique value proposition that Remix offers is that it's able to push a lot of the code to the backend. It manages form mutations for you. It emulates the browser. And so it is actual progressive enhancement rather than just rehydration. What progressive enhancement means is you have a baseline of a functional app, and then the JavaScript is there to make that user's experience better. But you don't. The JavaScript is not required for the app to function. And
Yeah, I was actually going to say, because I've seen examples where you could disable JavaScript and your application will still work, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. And that's not the goal. Like we actually don't really care too much about whether JavaScript is enabled.
Right.
The benefit of that, I mean, like, sure, that's a nice side benefit, but the real benefit is the mental model we get. So, and in that blog post, I talk about the mental model of MPAs was just so simple, and people who were building MPAs 20 years ago are just lamenting how difficult it is to build a web app today, because it's really, really challenging. And I would always just convince myself that, like, oh, well, we're expecting, our users expect a better experience than they used to. And that is true, but we can actually provide that experience and have the simple mental model. And that's what a PESPA is. It's a marriage between the simple mental model of an MPA and the capabilities of a SPA. So that's what that blog post is all about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm going to share it in the comments. I think it's a really definitely good read. And so with that being said, let's talk about some of the features that Remix has. Like one of my favorites is like nested routes, and also how it allows you to have a layout, which people are used to when they used to do, let's say, using React Router in their Create React application. Can you talk a little bit about nested routes, how it works, what are the benefits of it, and some of the cool things that you could do with it?
Yes, yeah. So nested routes, it's not an original idea from Remix or anything. The UI router from AngularJS had nested routing. Ember router had nested routing, I think. But Remix and React Router are, I think, take a unique approach to it. I've never had as amazing a time because of the focus on data dependencies as part of the router. Not only getting the data, but also mutating the data and managing all of that for you. So the router is responsible for any type of navigation that you have. In addition to mutations that don't result in a navigation, like a favoriting a tweet or adding a comment on a GitHub issue or something. And that's all done by what's called the transition manager. So anyway, what is so cool about nested routing is that most applications have this sense of UI being nested within itself relative to the route. So if we're talking, actually, you know what? I've got an example of this that might be easier to demonstrate. Let me see if I can pull this up.
Sweet.
Oh, hold on a second. Do I got wrong thing here? And I'll share my screen as soon as I got this up. Just give me one moment to make sure that this is working. Oh man. Okay. I'll have to deal with that a little bit later. Let's do this instead. We'll just go to the Remix website for this. Ta-da. Okay. Let me know if you can't see it.
Yep. So your screen is up. We're ready to go.
Yeah. So if you go to remix.run and we come down here to this example app, I actually have built this app, and we're going to demo that later, hopefully.
Yes, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. But here's an example of what I mean by nested routing and how it maps to the URL. A lot of apps have this type of look where you have a left nav, you have the top nav possibly, and then nested segments within that. And so each part of the URL is associated to some part of the app that's going to change as we navigate around. So this sales portion is going to change based on which one of these we are clicked on. This below the sales is going to change based on which one of these tabs we have. And then this bit is going to change based on which one of these we have. Maybe yours isn't quite as nested. For my website, I don't have quite as much nesting. I do have a little bit in the podcast that you talked about, the Call Kent podcast. Down here, I have this bit is a nested route right here. So like I do have a little bit of nested routing in my site. Most sites are going to have some nested routing involved. And what's really cool about this is that each one of those nested pieces are only responsible for the UI that they is relevant for it. So if we look at this, the file that represents this route is only responsible for that UI. It doesn't have to worry about the rest of the page. And its parent is going to be responsible for where that UI gets shown onto the page within itself. So it's using an outlet component to do that. So the parent is going to say, I'm going to render this thing, I'm going to render this list, and then if I have any children, this is where they go. And on top of, well, that by itself is great. It's really nice to not have to, with other solutions, every route is responsible for the whole page. So nested routing solves that piece really nicely. So you don't have to have like a layout component or something. But Remix takes this a step further by adding data as a part of this. And so not only is this particular route only responsible for that UI, but it's also responsible for its own data, which means that we can co-locate our data requirements with the UI that requires it. And now all of a sudden it's really, really easy to know where your data is coming from and not have to have like a bunch of context providers all over the place. And ultimately, what's really cool about this is it means you can delete all of your state management code, like your application state management. Of course, we've got like drop downs and stuff that, is open or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. That stuff's easy. It's the application state management is hard. It's like 50% or 30% of the code that you work on day to day involves state management. You can just delete all of that stuff because of this co-location that we get out of nested routing and data aware routes. And on top of that, because these routes are static, Remix they're statically analyzable. So we know what routes there are. We know what data requirements they have. And so we can just grab a URL and identify all of the routes that are going to be active when that URL shows up. And so we can prefetch all of that. We can run them all in parallel. We can not only the data requirements, but the code requirements, because we're code splitting on routes, as well as like the CSS or any images if you need them to be prefetched or whatever. We can prefetch all of that stuff because we can determine what data requirement or what things are required on a per route basis just by looking at the URL. So that makes things way faster, and it makes the developer experience way better to have that co-location.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Even from the standpoint of working with React. I think, hold on a second. We lost Kent, but he'll be back. But from the standpoint of working, welcome back. Probably something.
Obviously, I clicked the wrong button.
Yeah. So I was saying, what's cool, and this is something that I really like. Your database literally becomes your state, because you could have a loader on your route that gets the data that you need. And literally, my application, like you mentioned, I may be using useState once, and that really controls like the button that shows my mobile menu on and off. But everywhere throughout my application, there's literally no use state. I don't have to worry about like all the issues that sometimes you run into it. And it really eliminates like the game you play with React, where it's like, do you have data? It's like, or don't you have data? It's like, it's like you have the data and you just display it in your UI, which is amazing. So speaking of that, let's kind of segue to this idea of like, what is a loader function? How does it work? And because to me, it's like such a convenient way of getting data.
Yeah, so the loader function is a function that you define in your route that is just 100%, it runs on the server only. And then Remix is responsible for getting the data that you return from that into your UI. It effectively is when the document request comes in, the user comes for the first time, it's just going to be called, and then Remix will take what's returned from that and just pass it over to your UI. But then as the user is navigating between pages, it's going to be basically an API route. And Remix manages that for you, so you don't have to think about whether or not this is the document request or not. It's just everything can be like a document request, which is part of what makes Remix feel like the mental model of MPA, because like you just think about things as user just landed here for the first time. And so it runs on the server. The other cool thing about that is you can use private keys and not worry about sharing those with the world. You don't have any CORS headers issues with other APIs. Like so many things are eliminated with this. If you have to like call 30 APIs and then just calculate things between them just to display one thing on your UI, you can do all of that server side. So the GraphQL overfetching problem that is solved by GraphQL is not a problem in Remix, because like who cares how much you're fetching on the server? You fetch what you need to fetch. Like that's what GraphQL would do anyway on the server side. So we eliminate that problem. We also have strong typing between the backend code and the UI layer, which is just amazing. If you're using TypeScript, and if you're not, then hop on board. The water's fine.
I was going to ask you a follow-up question at some point of, because I'm really late on jumping on the TypeScript bandwagon because the last two companies I worked for, they were still using JavaScript. But I mean, I get the benefits of it. But what I wanted to say, and this is the joke that I made when I did, Austin Remix meetup, giving my first talk, like as a brand new person to Remix, I said, don't let TypeScript be the stopping point that stops you from trying Remix. Just set up a TypeScript project and then rename the file you're working on to JS until you figure out how TypeScript works. I'm saying don't do that, but I'm just saying don't wait to get started with Remix. It's such an awesome framework that I'm like super pumped and excited about it. So we talked about the loader function. Let's talk about, because it's very different how you handle mutation and form submission, and you have the action function. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the action is responsible for the making mutation requests to your backend. And I would say that like most frameworks have a pretty okay story for getting data on the page. Like I navigate there, I've got all my data, or I land there, I've got all my data. What's really tricky is mutations, because when you make a change, anybody who's been around for the React world for a while probably remembers when Flex was introduced by the Facebook team. It was not a library. It was just like, here's a concept or an architecture for state changes. And the example that they used to explain why this was so necessary was the chat that you get within Facebook, where you'd get a notification bell icon. And so you'd click on that and you'd open up the message, and now it's red. And that bell icon should update how many unread messages you have. Well, that just kept on breaking. It would just not update properly. And we actually still see this. Twitter has this bug, like probably every other week. You have this type of problem too. So like state management is a challenging problem when you need to do some sort of mutation that says, hey, I changed something. I changed the number of unread messages. And so Facebook decides to make this big architecture, single way data flow. And that's, we went through the Flux wars for probably, I think it was about a year, maybe a year and a half, where like there were a bunch of different implementations of Flux. And then finally Redux came around. Dan accidentally invented it. And now that's what a lot of people use. I used it. I did not like it. So the fact is that state management is difficult, and it's not because we need to get data. That's easy. It's that we need relatively easy. It's that we need to update the data that's on the page when a change has happened. And so Remix makes it feel like you don't have to think about that at all. With the Mutations API, Remix went back to the way that the web has always worked for mutations, and that is using forms. And what's cool about this is that it's how Remix apps mostly work without JavaScript at all, because we're just rendering forms, and Remix understands how the browser serializes forms and submits those, and then it will do a full page refresh, and we get all of the latest data. We get the server render with the latest data. And so that's part of why we get the nice mental model. But what happens when you do a full page refresh is you're updating all of the data on the page, right? That's like, obviously, because you're getting the latest data, the latest HTML. So what Remix said is, that seems like a pretty good default. So when we do a mutation, we'll just update all of the data that's on the page. And because Remix is your router and all of your data requirements are associated to your routes, Remix knows all of the data that needs to get refreshed, and it just refreshes it all. Now, of course, you can opt out of that for certain things. If you're like, wow, this is a lot of data, I don't want to refresh this unnecessarily. Like, it's basically like React.memo has a second argument that's called a comparator. So it allows you to determine yourself whether or not this should be refreshed. So it's similar to that sort of thing. Remix gives you, here's some information about the mutation that happened. Do you want to update? You don't really need to do that very often, though. The fact is that the default behavior is correct, and then you can optimize it if you need to. Most of the time you don't, but you can. And so, yeah, for that reason, you don't have to think about state management, application state management with Remix, because you render out this form, you hit submit, it goes to, like, literally in the same file, boom, here's your action that handles that form submission. And now you do all your server side stuff. And then you send back a response or a redirect or whatever makes sense for what you're doing. And then the UI updates automatically for you.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Before we get into your demo, just one more thing, because a lot of times when people say Remix, they automatically think React, but I heard, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to make it where it supports other things as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the idea is, well, when I started using Remix, I realized very quickly that React was just like a template library all of a sudden. Like before, Remix was, or React was like everything. I did everything in React, and like all my state management, everything happened in React components and hooks and stuff. And then with Remix, all of a sudden I was like, wait a second, I'm pretty much just using React for the JSX. Like there's not a whole lot here. Now for the dynamic components and stuff like that, certainly you're still using a lot of React stuff. But yeah, for the most part, from a product engineer standpoint, it was just rendering some JSX and stuff. And so it was, I mean, a lot of people want the benefits, or I should say 80% of what Remix is has nothing to do with React. Like there's a lot of the server side stuff, but there's also the transition manager, there's the router. And so Ryan and Michael decided, hey, how about we just build a new router that is framework agnostic. We'll call that the Remix router. And then we'll make the React router just be like an adapter for that thing. And so that's what they did. And that's what React Router 6.4 is. So no breaking change. That was a minor version bump. But yeah, completely completely changed the game there, because now we have all of the, like, most of the features of Remix, at least from a routing perspective, are implemented without any framework specifics at all. And so now we can start working on, well, actually, there are already implementations of a Remix router for Vue and Svelte and Angular. And so it's just a matter of getting a full framework that can handle the server rendering and stuff for you, and the conventions for Remix to be able to, or a Remix-like framework to support these other UI libraries. And so I don't know, because I'm not at Remix anymore, I'm not privy to the conversations they're having or what the progress is or priorities and stuff like that. But certainly somebody today could do that themselves and get all of the benefits that you have with Remix with your own flavor of UI. And that's fine with me. In fact, Ryan has been toying, and Jacob Eby from the Remix team as well. They've been toying with web components for the dynamic stuff, which is very interesting to me. I've always been not a big fan of web components, but if you use only certain pieces, it looks like web components can actually be pretty cool. So yeah, interesting future for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So let's jump into the demo that you had, some of the cool things you wanted to show us.
Yeah, sure. So I forgot to ask you, how much time do we have for this stream?
So we had a whole hour booked, so we have like about 25 minutes left.
Okay, cool. So this is the, I'll wait for you to get there we go.
Yep, there we go.
This is my implementation of that Fake Books app that Ryan put together for the Remix Run homepage. And so like everything works here. I added a couple of features to make it more capable of more things. but yeah, basically, it's like your typical app, supports CRUD operations, all of that stuff. So the feature specifically that I want to talk about, that I want to demo, that is really, really awesome, is what I'm calling full stack components. So because of the way that that Remix works, you can have server and UI code, server only and UI code in the same file. And the reason I'm not saying server and client code is because UI is both server and client. And so like you could disable JavaScript and it works still, so it does have to run on the server as well. But anyway, the specific thing I want to talk about is what we do when we create a new invoice. So I've got this customer thing, and I can filter down to specific customer and all of that. So what's really cool here is that this UI is making a request every character that you type to get the customers that match the requests. So we have this this HTTP call that has our query right here, and then sends us back the matching, and that's really small, sorry, sends us back the matching customers, so that we can display those in our UI. Building this sort of thing is non-trivial. I've done it in every framework, or every framework I've used: Backbone, jQuery, AngularJS, React by itself, React with Redux, React with React Query, and now Remix. It is not trivial. There's a lot that goes into this, especially when you take into consideration the backend piece. So the implementation of this, if I can find where that is, and this is in my advanced Remix repo. So if you go to github/KenCDodds/advanced remix, I'm working in the final directory under 05 non-nav fetching. But anyway, so if we go to routes resources, let's talk about a couple of things here. So this is a Remix app here. We've got our app directory, and inside of this, we have our routes folder. That's where all of our Remix routes go. So there's one really cool feature about routes, and that is if you have, here, we'll use our login as an example. If you have a default export, then that is just a regular route. It's got some UI. This default export is your React component that you export for your UI. You can use hooks, all of the things there. If you leave off the default export, suddenly that route now becomes just an API route. So it's just an API route at that URL. So actually, if I do, let's see, I think I should be able to do this. If I just copy this, there. So I've got my API route here at that URL that I have for like where that route lives in the file system. So I can say, yeah, we have no customers matching stuff, but here we've got one matching this, right? So just by virtue of not having a default export, I get an API route. So what's really so that's one thing. So here's our loader for that. I freaking love how simple this stuff is. I require the user, make sure that the user's logged in. I don't want unauthenticated users finding out which customers I've got. I parse out the query, make sure that's a string, so TypeScript is happy, and maybe it's not a string, maybe it's null, or I don't know, somebody's using this thing wrong. And then I've got my JSON helper to send a JSON response. There it is. That's my API route. Like that's pretty rad. But what's even cooler is I need to have a component that is using this API route. And so what I do, this is nothing to do with Remix. This is a convention I invented myself. I just export a component. So it's not a default export. It's just a named export. I call it customer combo box. And in here, I actually consume that API at that URL. So I'm consuming myself. I'm consuming the API route that's in this file. And so, I'm using this fetcher to do that, to do this imperative data fetch request. So when the input value changes as the user's typing, we do this customer fetcher dot submit to submit this request this get request to this action. We're doing a get request because this is a loader, and loaders handle get requests. I could switch this to an action and post this as like a post body, and then I'd switch this to a post, and basically it would still work the same. And then everything else that we've got here is all just React stuff. So like the only integration or touch points here is this use fetcher for doing imperative fetch requests that don't involve a navigation. And this we get the data off of that customer fetcher.data, and then we make a request to go get that data with this customer fetcher. And what's really cool is a lot of times people say, well, you got to debounce, right? Because if you don't debounce, then you're making a bunch of requests. And maybe like if you've got a problem with a backend that can't handle those requests or something, then maybe it would be good to do that. But with Remix, you don't have to, because Remix is going to automatically cancel requests that are no longer relevant anyway. And so one of the reasons why this type of UI is really difficult is because handling race conditions and resubmissions. And Remix handles all of that for you already, like for other reasons too. And so you don't have to worry about those race conditions. And if I wanted to add, I don't have it in here, but I can add it really easily. If we go, we'll just put it right next to the input. If we have our customer fetcher dot, let's see, yeah, state. If that state is, or we'll say if it's not equal to idle, then we'll say loading or null. Yeah, there we go. And so now you could put a spinner in there. But once this slow 3G network finally loads all of my app here, then you can see like I get that pending state here too. And like I can't express to you how freaking simple Remix makes this. So from being able to do pending states like as easy as you could possibly imagine, being able to integrate with other existing libraries. This is using downshift, but you could use whatever else you want to, just to say whenever the input changes, then make this fetch request, and handling race conditions for me automatically. Holy smokes, that's amazing. And then being able to have the code that is the backend piece of this in the same file gives me a full stack component. I handle both sides of the network rather than like having to talk to some API team or open some different file and make sure that those contracts are honored or whatever. So, and like the types are shared as well. So we have our customer search result here. I'm just saying this is the API that we get. Actually, I think I could do even better than this with the latest TypeScript types that we have. But yeah, you get it all type safe, all within one file. That is pretty rad. So that's just what I wanted to show it to you today.
Yeah, no, that's actually really awesome. I would have never seen this unless you came on today and showed it. This is actually really cool. I can't wait to try it. Yeah, no, for me, Remix, like I instantly fell in love just for the simplicity, like you're saying, like, look how clean the loader works. So to me, it's obviously you could use Remix as a full stack framework where you could do the front end and the back end. But what I like about it is, like I was mentioning to you before, Shim, I'm more of a front end developer, and I'm still learning like back end. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. And so for me, it's like I could use Remix on the front end, and then I could combine it with something like a Strapi CMS and make this process like really, really simple. And so I'll quickly share my screen just to share my project for a second. So I have my front end running Remix on Netlify. I have my backend running on DigitalOcean, and I have all my content stuff like through Strapi. And for instance, I have this content type called pages, which will display, the hero section, feature, quotes, whatever it is you decide. So when you take a look at my application, this is the main page that you see. And what's really cool, like if you take a look at the code, this is literally what, actually I'm looking at the other project here. I have too many screens open, that's the issue. But the pattern is the same. It's that loader function. And again, checking if you have data, a user, if not, will redirect me to login. But then I'm just, this is actually different example, but the pattern is exactly the same. It's like you have the loader function that gets the data, and then you display it really quickly. And what I did, just like the extra step, I'm calling get authors, or it could be like get pages, whatever it is. So I have this, you can name whatever you want, that server file, where I'm literally making the simple request to Strapi and I'm getting the data. And it literally doesn't get any easier than this. And to me, that's what I fell in love, because one of the things that I like about just in general, like anything I do, is this concept of being able to go into market like quickly and fast. And so if you have a framework that allows you to do certain things like faster or easier, like I really know, it's like, to me, it's really awesome. And so I'm really fell in love with Remix. Every application I'm building at this point is with Remix, because I want to learn more about it, get more deeper into it. I like the feature where on the link tag you could add the prefetch, where if you hover over the link, it'll start prefetching the data. I think that's like cool. Like these little cool features just make the experience so much nicer. So what I wanted to do before doing like the last closing remarks, because I do want to be mindful of your time. What would you say is the best type of project that is a good use case to use Remix?
Literally everything. No
Yeah.
joke. People will be like, "Oh no, there's no hammer can get every nail," like or whatever. Like, I cannot. So here's the thing. I guess the only from a can it do it really well perspective, I can't think of anything that would serve your users better than Remix. Now, like there could be some cases where you're like, oh well, like React just isn't performing super well for us. We need to use something else or whatever. There are some cases like that, and so I suppose you could build your own remix. Like we've got all the tools now, and you could build your own remix with whatever UI library you want. So there could be some cases like that, but like if you're like, well, but my site is not dynamic, it's all completely static. Well, CDNs are pretty good at caching even dynamic stuff from servers. So like you just set a proper cache header and poof, your CDN will cache it just the same as your build server would have generated it. So from an SSG, like a good example of this is the React router website is built with Remix and has a Fastly in front of it. It is, I think, probably 99% of requests made to that site are coming straight from the cache. And then also when there's an update to one of the docs, that update like happens in 5 seconds. So try to get your build server to rebuild your whole website in 5 seconds. Good luck. So Remix is really well suited even for those cases where people think it's not. Some people have said, well, I'm building Figma. Well, yeah, okay, that's fine. What else are you going to use that's going to be better for building Figma than Remix? Like you want to use Next.js. How is Next.js better than Remix for that specific use case? I don't know. It certainly doesn't have specific things that are affords it well to that use case, and Remix doesn't necessarily either. The fact is that they're like pretty much equal on that. You're not going to server render your canvas, but at the same time, there's still a lot of CRUD happening there. And with Remix's use fetcher, you can do a lot of those imperative mutations as well in a really great way. So yeah, I can't think of anything that Remix couldn't do really well. The Remix's biggest limitation probably right now is React. And I say that also with the caveat that like 99 or more % of applications can be built with React just fine.
Right.
And so there are very few people who need that extra benefit of a slightly faster hydration or no hydration at all, I suppose. And not to dissuade anybody from going down that route, and I think it'd be awesome if we could have even faster everything, but like go take a look at the React router website. That thing is outrageously fast, and it's getting 100 on the Lighthouse perf scores. So like I don't know what more you want from us. but yeah, so that's the long way to answer your question. Anything that you're building on the web, even if it doesn't have UI, if it's just like I'm making an API, my bot is built with Remix for my Discord. I use Remix to build my bot. So like anything you're building on the web, you can use Remix to build it. Another Andre, what's his last name? He's awesome in the Remix community, but he gave a B-side talk at Remix. It was a recorded talk for RemixConf. That was, he made a Google Home Assistant app, or maybe it was Alexa, but it was built with Remix. So like anything that talks HTTP can be built with Remix, and I think Remix will serve it really well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I tell people, go ahead and try it out, use it, and you will see. Like, I mean, I fell in love, and now I'm like really gung ho about everything, Remix. And with that being said, by the way, what are some of the best outside of like the Remix website and the docs? What are some of the good resources that people could reach out to learn more about Remix? I know you've done some stuff on Front End Masters, the Remix website. I think Ecad.io has some stuff. Is there anything in addition that you would recommend, or a strategy for someone
Sure.
looking to start out?
Yeah, sure. And I should probably temper that my enthusiasm from my last comment on with saying like there are things that Remix can improve. I'm not saying Remix is perfect and it's done. It's certainly not. There are things that they're working on. But yeah, as far as learning Remix, the docs are quite good. The quick start guide has an egghead tutorial that you can follow along. The longer deep dive with the Jokes app, I did a 6-hour live stream that you can follow along with that as well. I should mention that both of those were created before we have the new TypeScript improvements with between loaders and actions, and that is significant for sure. So probably like take a look at the tweet I just tweeted, and actually I'm going to write a blog post, or I've written a blog post that I'm going to publish here pretty soon about fully typed web apps, which is really, really awesome. So take that into consideration as well. Yeah, the community is constantly creating material around Remix. I know Level Up Tuts has done a tutorial about it. And like there are a couple others in the world. We've got a community page on the Remix docs that we can use to reference other things. And there's also remix.guide, which is an unofficial website that's pretty rad. Has a lot of references to other projects and learning materials and stuff there too. So and with Epic Web that I'm working on right now, I'm live streaming everything that I'm doing for Epic Web. Except I just realized I just finished building or writing the latest blog post for that, and I should live stream the blog post writing too. So I'm planning on doing that, even live streaming the blog post that I write. But yeah, so you can jump on my YouTube channel for that and sign up for the newsletter on epicweb.dev. That's definitely going to feature Remix, but it's also like just web stuff, which is part of why I love Remix, is that it's mostly just web stuff. Yeah, I'm definitely planning on creating a lot more Remix related content in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. And I want to say there's an excellent Discord community that I just recently joined. I'll put the link in the comments. And so if you haven't tried Remix, give it a try. And if you want to see how to use Remix with Strapi, and I just want to start this, I'm still learning Remix, but I'm totally sold on using it in pretty much all my projects moving forward. I do stream on my personal channel, Coding After 30, some of that stuff and my experience and what I'm learning. So not a professional at Remix yet, but going to get there. And so with this being said, I just want to say thank you, Kent, for giving us your time, jumping on. I'm really excited to have you here. It was a pleasure to meet you. And before you go, actually, you did mention you're doing your web.dev website. Is there anything else? What's other things that you're working on? I just want to make sure that we hear all the new stuff that's going on with you before you go.
Yeah, sure. So I actually just published all of the places I'm traveling to for conferences. If you go to kcd.im/map, That's a map of everywhere I've been and everywhere I'm going for conferences and workshops and things like that. And you could also go to my website, kensidodds.com/talks, and that's the talks that I'm going to be giving at these places. And so, yeah, if you want to, I am traveling quite a bit to see people, and it's a lot of fun. And then, yeah, epicweb.dev is like the thing that I'm working on.
Okay, nice.
If I'm not on a podcast or traveling for a conference, I'm working on Epic Web. So yeah, that's the most exciting thing that I'm working on right now.
No, that's awesome. And again, like, thank you so much for your time. I had a lot of fun and really appreciate it. So with that being said, everybody have a great day, great evening, great night, wherever you are. And thanks, Kent. And we'll talk to you on Twitter. Take care.
All right. See y'all later. Thanks.